Hey everyone, good morning. Bear with me until I am sure that I'm not talking to myself or by myself for the next few minutes and then we'll get going. Oh, get going. Let's see. Yes, okay. It's working again. I'm so happy because Facebook wasn't my friend for a bit with this year, and now I can see comments if they come up and questions. Um, Good morning. How are you doing? Today is May 12th, and it's my mother's birthday. She's not here in Canada, but it's very exciting. It's a special day for our family for sure. Um, Today is also the day after we did the chat, which was more like me talking for an hour about what counts as, from an academic path to an entrepreneurial adventure. And it was really good. And I hope you actually, for those of you who attended live, that you found it useful, informative, and maybe can implement or think about some of the elements that I spoke about there. For those of you who weren't live but registered, you should be getting an email, I think in about an hour, with the link to watch the whole video with the questions at the end. And I try to really be I would say, as raw as I could with the time that I had in terms of what I have had to sacrifice, what I have had to do, but also what I love doing about my business. And in many ways, I hope it is inspiring to those of you who might be thinking about the career possibilities post PhD or post a master's degree. So I can see comments, and if anyone is joining live, please let me know, because today, luckily, I can follow comments on my iPad here, and it's working beautifully. Um, Also, on another note, I want to start today by actually thanking the QRB members, Qualitative Research Blueprint members, that inspire me with content for the blog with the questions that they ask inside the course. So this is a question that came up with the first cohort. One of the members asked me about sharing transcripts with participants and whether that counted as member checking. Super interesting and valuable question. Inside Module 3 of QRB, we cover a variety of rigor strategies. And when I say rigor strategies, those are verification strategies that you would try to implement to ensure rigor as you're conducting your qualitative research project, and also to demonstrate rigor to future reviewers of your papers, of your work. And member checking is one of them. And we were talking about the practice that I have used, and many of the people that I know inside the course have also used, in terms of getting the transcripts, verifying them. And when I say verifying them, like going through to see if the person who did the transcription could understand the audio, and kind of like filling the blanks where maybe you had to go back and hear the audio again. And then either printing those and sharing with participants, or PDFing them or sharing them as a Word document with participants for them to review and kind of like give you a thumbs up, go ahead and use this, if that counts as a rigor strategy, as a verification strategy. I have done that in the past, and I am highly skeptical of that nowadays for a couple of reasons. It's actually for more than one reason, and I share those on the blog. The first thing is, I think it's a bit too much. I don't want to use the word condescending or patronizing, but in a way, Like if you put yourself in your participant's shoes, especially depending on the type of population that you are working with, the realities that they face, think about it. Like you're sharing a document that is about 15 pages or even more than that, depending on the length of the interview. And you're asking them to read that and reflect on whether it's okay to move forward with what they said. You're putting more responsibility on them. You're requesting them to use their personal time to do that for you. So, in that sense, I am really aware of what I ask people to do nowadays. It's interesting because, just so you understand where I'm coming from with this, recently the author of this book that I really enjoyed, I'm keeping this book close by, The Choice, Dr. Edith Eger, she was a guest in Brené Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us. And one of the quotes that they pulled from the transcript was, "How do you spell love?" And she said, and I quote, Time. Time. Time is so precious. And acknowledge that when you're asking your participants, the stakeholders involved in your research, to do anything for you or even with you. And I feel that member checking in that disengaged manner doesn't add much to the rigor of a study. So that's one of my points. Be careful with what you ask and also consider how much you would gain from that review. I do think, however, that not for all approaches to qualitative research, not for all methodologies. Some studies you don't even get that opportunity to go back to participants. And for those studies, you need to think about what other verification strategies you can have in place if you can't contact your participants again and engage with them. I do see value in member checking though, if that is something that is possible within your study. So how can you do that? That's an interesting question that you can ask yourself within the scope, the methodology, the whole design of your study. How can you do that? In my experience and in community-based participatory research, we often do that by keeping the communication lines always open and happening with stakeholders. With the research that I conducted, we would have meetings and present preliminary findings to stakeholders and say, how does that resonate with you? Does that make sense? And you also need to really understand to what extent you're reaching participants directly and learning from them, or if you're reaching people who are stakeholders but not necessarily participants, what that might mean. Because it's always that balance of knowing what you're gaining and what you might be losing. It's not necessarily positive or negative, good or bad. It's really like almost I would say avoid thinking of that dialectic thinking or way of thinking, like that dichotomy, positive, negative, good or bad. It's really more nuanced than that, and it's understanding that for every choice we make in our qualitative research design and implementation, it comes with a set of, I would say, consequences in terms of what it might mean for how the data is generated, collected, analyzed, and written. I do see more value in involving members of the research in a more active dialogue of the data or about the data. And though that active dialogue doesn't necessarily need to include transcripts, especially because of that whole idea of requesting someone to read a whole transcript. it is something, it's different from making that available and making that a possibility for them to come back to a transcript, to pull out something that they said. That is usually something that ethics boards will make sure that you can do it. And if you cannot do it, you need to tell your participants when they are enrolling in your study. So that door is still open to people who might want to access it. If they want access to their transcripts, if they want to pull out something that they said and they might have regretted later, that is available to them. But it's not required of them to review every single word once it's on paper or on a screen that they said to you during the interview. Yet, you can still involve them by sharing with them what they have shared with you in a summary form, either through a presentation, an infographic, and give them the opportunity to give you feedback, to say what they think about what you're kind of pulling from the data and synthesizing as you're doing your work as a researcher. One thing that is very important for all of us to understand, and I have said this in the past, and you might remember this, and it's a bit of a repetition on my end of repeating this again, is to also understand that sometimes, for you as a researcher to understand that sometimes when we engage participants in that type of member checking where you present a summary of the results or the key findings, that they might look and hear that and look at that and don't necessarily recognize themselves and what they told you. And it's something to be open to and to know how to respond. Overall, you are presenting more than one person's journey, experiences, phenomenon. So it's natural that things will get blended and you might be presenting to your participant things that they didn't necessarily say as an individual. So they need to understand a bit of the process that you took to get to what you're presenting to them as members of your research. It is, as I said, another thing that we just need to consider the implications. So for each action you take, for a way of conducting your research, when you go down this path versus this path, the important thing for you to do as a researcher is to understand what it might mean for your design, for your findings, for how you will write about what you did. So when I say, does it count as member checking? Well, I have done it. Many people do it. And sharing transcripts with participants is still widely used. And I think in some areas and in some, I would say, studies where you might be dealing with highly educated and topics that are of interest to your audience, that they might want that. Does it count as member checking? It will count if you justify it well enough when you are writing. When you show your reviewer and your reader why it made sense to share transcripts with your participants and get their feedback. Otherwise, know that I lean more towards I don't know how much it counts, because you need to value your participants' time. You need to be aware of what you're asking them to do and be mindful that they might say, oh, I have nothing to add, not because they didn't necessarily have anything to add, but simply because they might not have sat down and spent half an hour and an hour going through that document you shared with them. So if that might be the scenario, what else can you do to actually ensure a process for member checking that does support or enable rigor in your qualitative research? So I think that's something to consider and think about. And this is all I had to share today. If anyone has any questions about this video or about um, our live session, live chat yesterday, from an academic path to an entrepreneurial adventure, I'm super happy to help with the knowledge that I have, which is basically more my experience than someone who has any background in business or accounting, accountancy, accounting. Um, so happy to help. And if you have any questions, you know how to find us. Have a wonderful day, everyone. I will talk to you soon. Bye.